Hey everybody, thanks for joining us here today. This is Nicole with Topaz, and I'm very excited to welcome back Blake Rudis. Hey Blake.
Hello.
He is here to present Compositing Made Easy with Topaz Plug-ins. So very excited to see how he is working with certain tools like Remap and other plugins to create these really interesting images. Blake Rudis is the host of Everyday HDR and HDRinsider.com, and since 2010 has been publishing written and video tutorials on Everyday HDR, and was awarded the Best HDR Blog of 2012 by the readers of HDR One Magazine. He received his Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from the University of Delaware in 2006, and he has since channeled the passion for the arts into his love of HDR photography, and it has some beautiful images, as you can see here. In addition to his successful HDR blog, Blake recently self-published Exploring HDR, Photoshop, Photomatix, and Topaz Adjust, which is an awesome book about HDR photography if you're interested. So with that, let me go ahead and turn the screen over to Blake so he can go ahead and get started.
Sounds good. All right, so I want to start this out like I usually do by saying thank you to Nicole and the people at Topaz Labs for not only creating awesome software, but allowing us to come together and learn together. It's great opportunity. So compositing, if you were to go to a mechanic's garage and say, when you worked on my car, did you just use a wrench? He'd probably laugh at you because he probably used a screwdriver and many other things. I'm not a mechanic. I guess I'm a mechanic of Photoshop, but they use multiple things to work on your images, and that's the same thing that you're going to do as a compositor in Photoshop. So here we have a garage, and we're going to look at Photoshop as our garage, and we're going to look at all of the other programs and plugins that I'm going to use as the tools to create that. So you really can't just stop at one. I can't say that Topaz Adjust is the only plugin that I use for compositing, because you'll see that there's a lot that goes into a well-done composite. Or at least by the time this is over, I hope you think it's a well-done composite. So with this garage, this is an HDR photograph. It was 5 exposures. It was taken through a window, so it gave me a nice effect up here with this light that was kind of blaring in front of me, which is one of those things that you kind of want, in my opinion, when you're doing a composite. You want your background to have a nice striking light source, so that when you photograph your subject that's going to be on that background, you can manipulate your lights to kind of accommodate the lights that were already in the scene. Now, I guess that's kind of like the whole chicken and the egg thing, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Which comes first, the portrait that you take or the background that you put it on? In some cases, you're going to have many backgrounds to choose from if you keep stock photography of that. And in other cases, you might have a portrait that you've done, and you know that there's a great place that you can put it, so then you go and you shoot for the background. Either way, they can be worked with either way. So with that being said, this background, I don't want the background to take away too much attention from the foreground figure. And right now, because this is an HDR photograph with the amount of contrast that's in it, this is going to take away a lot from the foreground figure, and you're going to see that in a second when I composite them together. So the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of go through these settings a little bit, and in Camera Raw first, just to get it set up. I'm not going to do anything crazy with clarity or vibrance or saturation. A lot of that stuff is going to come with programs like Topaz Adjust and Clarity and Lens Effects that you're going to see here in a second. So with the exposure, I'm just going to kind of move it back and forth to see what I want. I want to brighten it up a bit, but not too much. So about 0.65. Now, don't take these adjustments that I'm doing here that they're going to work for every photograph. Some people say, well, how did you get that adjustment just right? A lot of times it's just it's a guessing game. You move these sliders back and forth to see what you like and what works for you as the artist, rather than there being a said way to do something. So then I'm going to move the highlights up a bit to kind of exaggerate the light tone that's back there, and move that up to about +10 and just give it a little bit of a boost. And the shadows, I kind of want to bring out some of those shadows a little bit, because if I want to push those back later, I can, and I'm going to do that with the dodge and burn. So with the whites, I don't really want to bring in any more white. I already added some of the highlights there, so I'll just leave that where it is, and then increase the bit to get a little bit darker in that background. So this is a pretty good base image to work with, and I'm going to be doing a lot of stuff with this in the meantime, so just bear with me. So now we need to get our foreground, and our foreground figure is going to be a tool, myself, the tool that maybe doesn't belong in a garage. And this is where we're going to talk about the right tool for the job. This guy is obviously the wrong tool for the job. but we're going to put him there anyway and see how he works out when this is all said and done. Obviously, Topaz does not support Petzl, Black & Decker, or Cuisinart. I guess this is just the portrait that I took. They are in no way affiliated. I guess I'll put that little caveat out there. So again, with the what do you do with this foreground figure? I want to go ahead and drop the temperature a little bit because the green screen in the background, that's another thing. People say, well, what kind of green screen do I need? Do I need a backdrop? You know, I probably should have used a white seamless for this, but I don't have a white seamless. So I went to the fabric store not too long ago and bought this long bolt of vibrant neon green, knowing that it wouldn't that I could take things away from it very well. It's a green screen, but not necessarily something bought off the shelf. Anything really works. You can use any background, especially with something like Remask makes it really easy. So because that green does reflect a little bit, I'm gonna grab my temperature here and drop it down, give it a little bit more blue effect and take away some of that warm background that's there. So with the exposure, I'm probably going to bring that up just a little bit because I want to get more in the foreground figure, more light in that foreground figure. And then also drop the highlights down a little bit because they're starting to shine pretty hard here on the face. I'm going to drop that down and then bring up the shadows just a bit, actually a lot, so I can get some of that out in the foreground effect. Now, you have to consider we're putting a single portrait onto a 5 exposure HDR effect. So we're going to have to kind of make this foreground figure look like he belongs there. So he's going to need some HDR treatment. That's kind of why I brought those shadows up. During the HDR tone mapping, you get the ability to really exploit those shadow areas. And we're going to exploit it even further with Topaz Clarity, Detail, and Adjust. So I'm going to use 3 different programs on just the foreground figure. So now I'm going to open this image and go into Topaz Remask. And if you don't own Remask, it is absolutely phenomenal. The more I jump into Remask, the more I love it because it's so easy to manipulate a photograph with Remask. So I'm going to go and zoom in pretty close on this this guy here. We'll just call him the tool for now. And the way I like to use Remask is I like to, if you see how I'm grabbing the background like that, I'm pressing Control and Spacebar. That would be probably Command and Spacebar on a Mac. And then I can grab the hand tool on the fly so that I'm not restricted to moving back and forth to my tools palette. So I'm going to use a brush size in blue of about 50. And I'm just going to go over this area, over the areas that I want to, that I think are going to be the difficult areas for Remask to figure out. So I'm just going over very, not really paying too much attention to the exact features that I'm trying to grab here, but I'm just trying to make sure that everything that I want to be in the mask is left in green on the one side, and then I'm going to fill the rest of it with red on the other. Now, it does pay off in the very end if you make the best selection possible. Remask is very intuitive, but it does help if you do Remask a favor by getting a good selection to start with. So that's why I'm taking the time to make this selection here. And then I'm going to go and press that hotkey for the hand tool and just kind of move my way down. Just keep my cursor. Now you see that green flash that I kind of missed right there? I'm going to go and cover that up, and I'm going to show you why in a second here on another area. So if I just go on both sides and start covering this stuff up, good to go. Again, I'm going to use that hotkey to use the hand tool so I can just go right down this photograph and then work my way all the way down. Yeah, so, you know, if any mechanic had a plumber's wrench in his belt and a saw that big that was about to work on my car, I think I would take my car somewhere else. But you see how I purposely made that splash on the right-hand side of that leg. Now, when I compute, I'm actually going to press the paint bucket tool, and if I zoom out here, you'll see that I can use that paint bucket on the areas that I don't want to be selected. I'm going to leave that green there so you can see what happens if you make a sloppy mask. So I'm going to go and press Compute Mask. So when you press Compute Mask, it's going to do its best to make a mask of what you have selected. So if you've done the hard work on the front side, Remask is going to do the rest for you. So I like to look at this in the keep mode. So I get to see what I'm going to keep on a gray screen. Now, if you look, I'm missing the blade of the drill bit there. So I'm going to go back into that trimap real quick and zoom in to that blade and take a very, very small brush and just go green right inside that blade, and then go back to the keep mode and see I've got some flash on the side there. But that's not that big of a deal because we can paint that in later. Now what we're seeing here, if you zoom in onto the figure, is that you're seeing a lot of, oops, Control Z, that will back up. You can see that on the edges there's some green flare on the edges. You can really easily get rid of that by going down to the mask adjustment section and moving up the desaturation. I'm going to move it up to something like 90, and now that green is starting to go away. I can also move up the recovery to kind of pull in the edges of it as well. It moves a little bit. I would normally do it in high quality, but I don't want this to slow down the webinar. So you can see that edge is already cleaned up. I mean, this is fantastic. I really wish I had this when I first started doing my compositing stuff in the past. And grab the red brush here and just start painting in on the sides of this. And Remask is so intuitive that it's going to very easily select those areas that I don't want in this as well. Now you can see there's some areas in there that are kind of tricky, so I'm going to go back over it with the blue and see if it will recover it for me. And it does. It recovers that blade because it knows, hey, you're telling me this is a tricky area, right? So I'm going to go ahead and fix that for you. And that's just how awesome Remask is. I'm going to keep saying that Remask is awesome because it's incredible. So let me go back to the one-to-one here and show you this little leg that I missed out here. Again, I can hit that with the red tool to say I don't want you to be there. And it's going to do its best to cover that up. But let me go back to the blue, because if we go back to our tri-map, you can see that I probably should have selected that area. So if I just select that area and then go back to the keep, it's going to do a pretty good job of selecting that area out. So there's also some other really awesome features here in Remask, and one of those is going to be in the hair. So if we zoom in to the hair a lot closer, it's really awkward looking at yourself so close like that, but it doesn't look like we're looking too bad on the hair, but I'm going to go ahead and just cover that with the blue brush and make sure that I've got all of that stuff kind of out of the hair there, because this mask actually worked out really well. If you did have a problem where there was some green on the outside, let's say we do that. Let's say we want to just do this real quick. If there was some green on the outside like you see here, you can go to the dual color selection and you can select the green. This is what I want to stay. I want the brown to stay and I want the green to go away. And then you could start painting in that area and it would start to take away those areas that you don't want in there. And it can be a slow, meticulous job, but this is how you can get some really good hair selections. So I don't really have to worry about that with this photograph because I don't have any long strands kind of hanging out. So I'll just go back over with that blue brush to make sure we don't have anything there. So before we go ahead and wrap this one up and go into the rest of our composite, I'm going to go ahead and do a one-to-one look here and then go to the cut section and see if there's anything that looks like I might need to select it better. Like right here on this, on the bottom of this drill bit here, I'm going to go ahead or drill tool. I'm really not sounding like I know what I'm talking about, but that is a drill. Just kind of go over those areas with the green where I see that it's not quite selected the full mask. If it's the full mask, it'll all be in gray. And if it's kind of, if it's missing something, you'll see like these edges here, like if I zoom in real close to there, that's kind of a part where the mask is not going to be 100%. So I'll just go ahead and click in that area to make sure that that is selected a little bit more. Sorry for all the clicking noises, but this is part of making a good mask. Oh, here's a good example of it. If I zoom in right here, this is not a 100% mask. You'd start to see some of the background show through this, so I'm going to make sure I select that. And like I said, Remask is very intuitive. You don't have to go over the whole thing. You just give it a good little swipe, and it says, oh, okay, I know what you're talking about. You want all this stuff too. Okay, cool. I'm good. It doesn't actually say that. It'd be kind of cool if it did talk to you. But that works for me. So I'm going to go back to the fit, and now go back to the keep, and I have a really good mask selection here. Now I can get really a lot more meticulous about this if I wanted to, but what this Remask has already done a very good job with this selection. So I'm just going to press OK. So now I've got my mask, and if you look, it's going to open it up with a new layer on top of my old layer with a layer mask already there. I like to keep that layer mask there in case there's things I want to bring back in from the other photo, or in case I miss something, I'm not stuck with just a layer. Now you can set up your preferences in Topaz Remask to either give you a layer without the mask or give you a layer with the mask. I prefer it with a layer with the mask. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag this layer and drop it right into our garage. So if you look at our garage, where do I want to place this guy? You know, we typically read from left to right. So I want you to see that this guy first, and then I want you to read the rest of the garage. Because if I put him over here to the right, you're not really going to see that it's a garage. If I put him over here to the left, you start to see the car. So I'm going to put him right here, but I'm going to make him a little bit smaller. So if I press Control T and then Control 0, that'd be Command T or Command 0, I can go ahead and get the full look at that portrait, and I'm good right there. Okay. So one of the things that I like to do is always make sure that my source images are still kept untouched. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a folder, and I'm going to call this source. So these are my source images. These are the original images that I started with, and now I can grab both of these layers and duplicate them by pressing Command or Control J and move them above that folder that says source. So I'll go back to that whole thing later, but if I did an adjustment that I didn't like, or I wanted to bring something back from another photo, I can always go back into my source images because they're right there. I'm going to go ahead and close the eyeball for now so that you don't see that. So now, if we look at we've got a nice figure here on our foreground, but he doesn't fit. The background, I should say, very contrasty. It's HDR. It swallows our figure. So what we need to do is we need to take our figure and pull him forward and push the background back. So this whole rest of this webinar is going to be about pulling that foreground figure forward, pushing that background back so that we can get what we want as our main focal point. In this case, the main focal point is our tool in the garage, i.e. myself. So let me go ahead and start by using denoise on the background. So I'm going to go ahead and close out this, make sure these source files are in here. I'm going to go ahead and close out this source, double click the background layer because it won't let you do it unless you double click that background layer. So I'm going to close that source folder so we don't see it. Now I'm going to go to this background copy. I'm going to go to Filter, Topaz Labs, and Denoise. So Denoise, you have a lot of different noiseware software out there. You know, Camera Raw is great, but it doesn't have quite the capacity that Denoise has. And that's why I like Denoise so much. So I'm going to start this off by going JPEG Strong. This is a TIFF file, but I like what JPEG Strong looks like. Now, it's a little over the top at first. We have a lot of noise reduction going on. All this color noise that you see in this photo is starting to really get blended together, but we can fix that. Mainly if I go here into the red color noise, I can see there's a lot of red color noise. I can see a lot of blue color noise. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust the red color noise. And adjust the blue color noise. I'm going to bring the blue up actually pretty far. Now, a lot of these adjustments I've already done on the front side, so I know what selections to make, and that's just to expedite the tutorial. But you'll see here how this is helping. Now, this noise reduction to me is a little too strong. It's really just taking those pixels and blurring them together, and it almost looks artistic. And if you like that look, that's great. You can actually bring that strength, you know, way up and really get a blurred, artistic look. I'm going to so that it's not overbearing noise. Now, some people don't, you know, pay too much attention to their noise reduction, but I'm one of those sticklers that really gets into my noise reduction. If you look, and this should be a dark shadow area up here, and with the noise there, it actually looks like there's detail there. And then again, that's one of the drawbacks of an HDR photograph. The HDR process tends to make a lot of noise, especially in our shadow areas. So this is a great way to reduce that noise using Topaz Denoise here. So the next thing we're going to be worrying about here while the plugin is doing its work. Now, a lot of these adjustments that I'm doing that you're seeing are actually moving pretty fast. That's because I'm only working on 8-bit TIFFs. Normally, I would be working on a 16-bit TIFF. I'm working on 8-bit TIFFs to speed up the process here with the webinar. So what I want to do now is I have mixed color temperatures. I have a color temperature for the foreground that is totally different than the color temperature for the background. And there's a really that can solve that. And that's, we're going to duplicate the background by pressing Command or Control J, move that above our foreground, and then we're going to press Alt or Option so that we make a clipping mask. So that background just goes into my foreground area. So right now you can't really tell, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to blur this. I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, and then go to Average. Average blur will take all of the colors in the photograph, blur them together, and give you the average color. So now that average color of my background, which is going to be where I'm going to be getting my color temperature from in the to begin with, if I took this photograph, is like this brownish color. So if I change that to soft light, I now have a very good color temperature for the foreground figure. And if I drop the opacity a little bit, let's go down to about like 80% there, maybe a little bit more. I now have a much better color temperature on this foreground figure. He's already looking like he's starting to blend, even though we still have some work to do. So now what I want to do is I want to take the background and kind of do an eye effect. Typically, if you took this photograph and you were centrally located on the foreground figure as being your focal point, typically anything in that plane would be in focus and everything else would be out of focus in the back, depending on the aperture setting that you had. But what I want to do is kind of reverse that so that the foreground that's on the same plane as him is blurry and then the rest of it in the background is not. That will help to push the background back and pull the foreground forward. So I'm going to go to Filter, Topaz Labs, and go to Lens Effects. So with Lens Effects, I'm going to do a center focus lens effect, which is going to basically make everything that's in the center of where I choose to be the center be in focus, and then everything else be sort of blurred and out of focus. So I'm going to go into the bokeh adjustments here and then go to Effect Center. And I want that center of effect to be right here on that car in the background. And the blur amount is a little too much. It's at 0.6, so I'm going to bring it down to something like 0.45 or around that area, so that it's not completely blurred out, but I do have some blurring on that edge. Now you can also do some other cool stuff with this, like maybe do the tilt shift one. That would be pretty cool for that background as well. But for this one, I'm going to stick with that center focus and put that center focus right here as I was before, and then drop that down to 0.46. Now, Lens Effects has a lot of cool stuff that you can play with that I did a lot of experimenting with beforehand, and I really liked what I had with just that center focus. So I'm going to press OK. So you can see here, I'm picking a bunch of different tools out of my garage. You know, maybe I went for the power drill at one point. Maybe I went for the wrench. You know, definitely the powerhouse of this compositing is Remask. That's going to help you out a lot in all that stuff you do. But you have multiple tools to choose from. So what I want to do now is I want to add sort of like a light flare effect on this shoulder, because this light is very overpowering here, and I want to show that on this figure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a curves layer. And with that curves layer, I'm going to bring up the dark area on the curve. This is the dark area of the curve. This is the light area of the curve. I'm going to bring up that dark area and then bring down that light area so that I get a nice kind of, it doesn't look nice right now, but when I change this to color dodge, it's going to give me a nice burnt looking effect. So if I take that mask and press Control-I to invert it, I can now paint with white on my foreground figure to kind of bring in those areas that I want to have that light flare effect. I want it to be on the shoulder area here, so I can start bringing that area in. I want it to be on this arm, maybe on this ear, a little bit on the background of the hair, so I can start, you know, making sure that that light actually looks like it's affecting my subject here. Now, if you accidentally painted an area that you don't want, you can press the X key to switch back and forth between the colors, and then go back to black and paint in there. Sorry about my computer dinging at you. And then I'm going to go back to white. I'm just going to reverse those and just start painting some of these areas that I want to kind of show through, like that light is really beaming on the sides of. And this is a way to help pull your background and your foreground together, where this light effect actually looks like it's affecting our subject matter in the foreground. So that very stark light in the background is now looking like it's affecting our foreground figure. So that 100% might be a little too much for this, so I'm going to bring that down a little bit, though, to something like 70 or 80%. So it's not so much, it's not so powerful, but it does show that that light is affecting the foreground figure. Another thing I want to do is kind of pull this manual out and make it look a little bit more like a white manual, because that was a white manual, so we want it to be white. So again, I'm going to use another curves adjustment. And I'm going to select the white eyedropper and select that Cuisinart manual. I can select pretty much anywhere on here. And then again, that mask that's on the right-hand side of it, press Control or Command-I to invert it. And then just paint in there pretty quickly where you want that Cuisinart manual to come back and look good. Any mechanic who's looking at a Cuisinart manual like that and has the cars behind him. I don't think I want him working on my car either. This is the wrong tool for the job here. So that is a little too much as well. So I'm going to bring down the opacity on that to about 75%. So that now our manual looks like it's coming forward. So now we have this this effect where you're seeing a clear, distinct division of foreground, almost two middle grounds and a background, with this foreground manual being so much in your face, and then the background getting progressively farther out, all the way to the back of the building here. But again, we're going to keep pushing this. One of the things I don't like about this foreground figure is that he doesn't look like he belongs in the photograph because he's not HDR like the rest of it. So we're going to fix that by going into the background, or going to, I don't know why I made background copy 3, but anyway, this foreground figure, and we're going to filter Topaz Labs and go to clarity. So what I want to do is make him look like he belongs there by increasing the contrast in the foreground figure. So I'm going to move the micro contrast up. What you're going to see here too is that it's really going to help the folds in the like the drapery folds that you're going to see here in the clothing. So I'm going to bring the low contrast down a little bit, and then the medium contrast, I'm going to drag that up a little bit, not too much, and then bring the high contrast down a little bit. And then if I look at my original and look at what I've got now, I'm starting to get more of a gritty texture effect. Now, it's not going to be as gritty as I want it to be, but that's where Topaz Adjust and Topaz Detail are going to come in. So I'm going to move the black levels up just a little bit, and I'm going to move the white level up just a little bit. So let's zoom in real quick and see my before and after. So there's my original, and there's my after. So I'm starting to get a more contrasty looking photograph, almost like I was tone mapping it. I guess I am tone mapping it here with the contrast here, because that's pretty much what you're doing with a HDR software. Now, again, I'm going to reiterate that some of the mask on here is you're going to see in some of these plugins that it doesn't quite look right. Don't worry about that until you press OK and then look at it and make sure it's all good. So now I'm going to go into Topaz Detail, and what I want to do is smooth out the skin, but at the same time increase the detail that needs to be increased in it. And this is where I love Topaz Detail. Oh, sorry, I'm in clean. Let me go to Topaz Labs Detail. Okay. Is it with Topaz Detail you can do a lot of good skin effects with it. It's not just bringing out detail; it's also taking detail away from it. But you can do both at the same time, and that's what you're going to see here. Is that I'm going to be smoothing out the skin, but at the same time, I'm going to be adding a lot of detail to that skin as well. That is quite the confused look for looking at a Cuisinart manual. All right, so I'm going to bring up the detail a little bit to something like 0.1, but then I'm also going to drop the boost in it. And what you're going to see is that this is going to kind of level out that skin so that it's not so gritty looking, but also you still get the detail that you had from the small details. I'm also going to bring down the medium detail a little bit and then boost up that medium detail a little bit. So let's also, before we do our before and after, let's bring up the large details a little bit. That's about good. Look at my before and my after. So now I'm adding even more contrast, making this look even more HDR. But if you've ever taken a portrait and tried to make it look HDR by tone mapping it in some tone mapping software, you'll know that it doesn't always look great. It looks like a coal miner. They look pretty nasty and gritty and dirty. And that's kind of the same thing that's going on here, but it's a refined dirty. It's not like that overly noisy portrait dirty. I wouldn't suggest some of these techniques for women. They look great for men because men have that, you know, kind of gnarly look going on, especially this guy who hasn't shaved in 5 days. But with women, it doesn't look so great. You want to go more towards the softened skin tone effect rather than the you know, the blatant grungy effect. And if I wanted to, I could do a mask on this as well and keep pushing that a little bit further. You should always make a background for this one or a duplicate. I should have made a duplicate for this so that if I didn't like any of the effects that came through with Detail 3, then I could mask out just those areas and just keep those ones. But I kind of like what's going on here with the whole thing. If I go ahead and zoom out, I really like the look that I'm starting to receive from this, this detail and clarity combination. And again, a lot of the Topaz products work so well together rather than just by themselves. Stuff that I couldn't bring out with just clarity, but I could with a little help from detail and light, and vice versa. So now what I'm going to do is I really want to push that background back even more, and that's going to take some stuff here in Photoshop. One of the things here is that you can tell it's very oversaturated, especially in those red areas. So if I slightly desaturate that background, you're going to see that it's going to push that background further back and pull my foreground figure forward. Now what I can also do is go into the contrast. I can make a contrast layer. So what I did there was I made a hue saturation layer. Sorry if I'm moving fast. I opened up my adjustments dialog and just clicked hue saturation. And then in that hue saturation layer, I just dropped the saturation down. Now here you get the option to move your saturation. You can adjust the hue of that saturation as well if you want to change the color. I'm just going to go ahead and drop the saturation. You can also change the lightness and darkness of that background. Again, I only need to do the saturation. So if I go into the brightness contrast layer that I just made, I'll go ahead and delete that and show that again. Go to the adjustments section and then go to brightness contrast. If I increase or decrease the contrast, I should say, that's also going to help push the background back and pull the foreground forward. So we're making some progress here by pushing that background further back and pulling the foreground forward. Another thing that really helps with that is a vignette. Now, I don't like vignettes in the typical style that most people like vignettes. I like my vignettes to be almost so you couldn't even tell that a vignette was there. So what I'm going to do is press Shift F5, and that's going to, actually, sorry, again, moving ahead, I'm going to make a new layer by using the new layer icon and go Shift F5 for fill. Sorry, I have to tone myself down a little bit, and then make that whole layer black. So you can see my whole background disappears. Don't worry about that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a mask on there. And this is just a way that you can make your own vignette without going into any software or going into the lens correction or anything like that. So on that background, on that mask, I should say, I'm going to paint with black to go ahead and bring some of that background back. And I'm going to, all right. There we go. It's caught up now. I'm going to drop the opacity on that to about 75% and then drop the fill to about 50%. This is my typical go-to for a vignette. Now the vignette is there. It's very subtle, but unless I told you, you probably wouldn't even know it was there. But again, it helps push that background back, pull the foreground forward. All right, so moving into this a little bit more, I'm going to accent that light that you see back there and make that a little bit more prominent so that my foreground figure even pulls out even more towards the foreground. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new layer and paint with white behind my foreground figure. It's going to be a very big blob of white. But now I'm going to add a mask and then make my brush a little bit smaller and paint right in the middle so that this starts to look like a ring of light that's around him in the background. So I can change that opacity down to something like 75% so it's not so blatant and obvious, and then also change that effect to overlay. So if we look at normal, and then we look at overlay, and then we look at it if it's not there, you see how the light is starting to shine more on that side wall. What I'm also going to do is make another layer, and I want to blow out that light now. So I'm going to change my brush size to something a little bit larger, and just paint white right there. But then I'm going to change the size of it by pressing Control-T, Command or Control-T, and then change the size of it so I can free transform it so that that light is a little bit more, has a little bit more punch to it, so that it looks like it should be casting that kind of glow around my foreground figure. And then obviously drop that opacity down quite a bit. So if you see the before and after on that, again, we're pulling our foreground figure even more towards the foreground and pushing that background back. So now what we can do is to emphasize this just a little bit further as far as our foreground figure is a dodge and burn layer. Now dodge and burn layers are extremely important. I actually have 3 sticky notes above my monitor that say dodge and burn. Dodge on one and on another one and burn on another one. That's my constant reminder to dodge and burn. I go back to the greats like Ansel Adams who dodged and burned and was the father of dodging and burning. If you don't know who Ansel Adams is, I suggest you look him up, especially if you're a photographer, because that's kind of where our roots start as far as photo processing, in my opinion. But you know, that's also I'm also biased because I like his work. If I press Shift F5 on this background on a new layer, I'm going to make a new layer. So make that new layer, press Shift F5, and then change that to 50% gray. Now I'm going to change that to soft light. Now a lot of people ask me, why are you doing this for dodging and burning? You can just use the dodge, burn, and the tool and the burn tool, and you don't have to worry about that. And that's true, but at the same time, they have their limitations because they make permanent changes to your photograph. If you do your dodging and burning on its own separate layer, it doesn't. It's not what they call permanent editing or destructive editing. You can always just unclick or delete even that that dodge and burn layer. So I'm going to do is I'm going to select the dodge tool, and if I dodge, I'm going to make something more white. Now I have my exposure is set to something like 20% up here because I don't want that to be too high, and I want it to just attack my mid-tones. So if I just start painting in white, you're going to start to see that now those areas that should, or sorry, not painting in white, but dodging, I'm going to start bringing those white areas and those highlights out a little bit. I can do that with the manual. I can do that with the hands. I can do that with this drill over here. And this is dodging anything. Now, if I press Alt or Option, it automatically switches me over to the burn tool. And you might not be able to see this right away, but when I turn that effect on and off, you're really going to see it. All right, so now I'm going to burn out some of the background area. And again, you know, this is one of those tools. It's another tool that's in my tool belt here while I'm in this garage. And I'm just burning in those areas in the background to help push the background further back and the foreground further forward. I'm going to say that a lot, but that's really what you're going for when you're compositing, and you want to make it look realistic. One of the things that you can do is in those prominent areas that should be white and those prominent areas that should be dark in the back, if you make those two separations, like this shoulder here, it really does help to push the black will push it back and the highlights will push it forward, because our eye naturally gravitates towards highlights when we look at a picture. So we're going to see that this guy should be in the foreground focal. So if we turn that on and off, that's our dodge and burn layer. There's before, there's after. You can start to see that you can get pretty painterly in how you want to manipulate the photograph. So one thing that I like to do when I am dodging and burning is actually create a grayscale layer. So if I make a gradient map of this and then change that gradient map by clicking in there to black and white, I can start to see how this photograph looks in black and white. If I have a nice stark white and a nice stark black, I'm really happy. And if I have a nice separation in between of all these gradients in between, again, I'm very happy. This all goes back to Ansel Adams with his zone system. So it really does help to dodge and burn by changing your image to a grayscale. So you can put that grayscale layer there and then dodge and burn directly on that photograph, so you can see what it looks like in black and white. And then when you take the eyeball off of that black and white layer, or just delete it completely, you'll have a nice photograph that has been dodged and burned in grayscale. And a lot of people don't understand, why would you turn to grayscale? But in order to understand color, you have to understand grayscale, because every color that's in this photograph has its place on the grayscale. So it's important to know those things. So now I'm going to finish this all up by pressing Control-Shift-Alt-E, and that's going to make a stamp. Control-Shift-Alt and E at the same time. It's like up, up, down, down, left, right, BA, select, start. You know, the infinite live code for Contra, if you played Nintendo back when I did. But Control-Shift-Alt-E or Command-Shift-Alt-E all at the same time will make a stamp of everything that's going on below this photograph. So now what I want to do is go into Topaz Labs Restyle. And what I like about Restyle is that this is going to help pull the whole image together. It's going to get everything on the same color temperature, and it's really going to push this to the next level. So this is, you know what I love and I hate Restyle at the same time. I'm going to tell Topaz that right now. That's my confession. And I love it because I hate it because every time I come in here, I find a new preset that I like, and I love it because every time I come in here, I find a new preset that I like. So I love it and hate it for the same reasons, but I end up spending so much time in here. So I found this one, I don't really know how to Prussian and Goldenrod Sundown. I like the way that sounds. But I like the color and the effect that this is bringing to it. It really pulls that blue forward in that uniform. It really looks great, but it's also a little too much at the same time. So with that color being selected, you don't have to like every preset. What you can do is you go in here to the opacity and drop that down to something like 50 to 55% so that it's not so prominent. And then if you look at your colors here, what colors are being affected? The primary, secondary, third, fourth, and fifth. I can tell that that secondary color is that blue uniform. So I'm going to drop the saturation of it just a little bit so it's not so out in the open and that it matches that car in the background just a little bit. So if I press OK, that's going to go ahead and apply this Restyle onto my new stamp. Again, like I said before, this brings all of it together. It matches my color temperatures. It makes my foreground and my background seem like they belong together, but it doesn't make my foreground blend into my background. So what I'm also going to do is make a mask on this because my foreground figure here looks like a little jaundicey. So I'm going to go ahead and select that mask layer and just mask out the face. So I make sure that I have my brush tool selected. Now, see, I had my dodge tool selected. So I'm going to select my brush tool and mask out the face and any skin areas so that he has that peach face instead of that yellow face and yellow fingers. Now, the last thing I'm going to do, because I want to take this to the over the edge just a little bit more, is go ahead and duplicate my foreground figure by pressing Command or Control J. Duplicate that guy, go to Filter, and go to Topaz Labs and Adjust 5. Now with Adjust 5, I'm going to do a dynamic pop effect that is really going to make this look grungy, and that's in the HDR collection under Dynamic Pop. And if you don't own Adjust 5, it's actually worth buying it just for that Dynamic Pop and Dynamic Pop 2. I've said that on many tutorials, and I'll stand by it. And now, so here's our foreground and our background all merged together in one composited photo. And if we go back to the very beginning of this and look at our source images, if I just select those source images, look at how horrible that was starting out, you know? And then now, if I just look at everything that we've done, we've now successfully pulled our foreground forward, pushed our background backward, made them look like they belong together, and given our portrait an HDR effect. If you don't like how stark that Topaz Adjust effect is, because you made a background, you can just drop the opacity on it a little bit so it's not so bam, right up in front of your face. So, you know, in wrapping all of this up, as far as compositing is concerned, it's not always about compositing a portrait onto an HDR background. I don't want people to think that that's the only effect for this. So if you look at this photograph here, this is a single photograph that I then composited to make it look like it was in a war zone. I made this this display look like it was where it was supposed to be and told the story of how that howitzer cannon worked. Again, something like this, I took bits and pieces of probably about 150 different photos to put this together, almost like in 3080 there's going to be the destruction of the world by these rhino, turtle-shelled, butterfly-winged aliens, just to tell a story. And then in this photograph, composite one photograph multiple times. So it's not always about just 2 photographs or 3 or 150. You can take one photograph and continue to composite it upon itself to kind of give it like an MC Escher effect. If you have any of these spiral staircase photographs, they work perfect for doing something like this. And then Christmas cards. So you might not think you have any reason to do this compositing stuff, but if I tell you that you can make the most compelling Christmas cards, people leave my family's Christmas cards on their refrigerators all year round because of how they look. So this Christmas card was created from 6 different photographs that I took of my family. And you know, you make something like this, and then this year's Christmas card, I made it look like, you know, an ugly sweater advertisement for something, I don't know, one of those big name corporations. So, you know, it's not always about compositing a portrait onto a background. Sometimes it's about multiple portraits to make some awesome Christmas cards. That about wraps it up. Any questions?
Awesome, Blake. Thank you so much. That covered a ton of information, not only with Topaz, but also with Photoshop, and everybody really has been appreciating some of these techniques. And let's start from the top. Rex had asked, prior to you even starting this session, what's the best way for you to get an HDR-like effect from a single JPEG image using Topaz?
That would probably be Topaz Adjust. And if you saw during the presentation, I used Topaz Detail and Clarity together. And in the past, I probably would have said hands down Topaz Adjust right off the bat. But I think you can get a nice, and that's for an over-the-top HDR effect. You can really get that over-the-top HDR effect with Topaz Adjust. But I think you can bring out a lot of that detail and clarity, with Detail and Clarity. Ironically, that's the name of them. But the the thing is, a lot of people want to go over the top with HDR, and HDR simply stated is high dynamic range. If you increase the contrast in a photograph, you've created a high dynamic range photo. You don't necessarily have to tone map for that, and that's where I think detail and clarity, either by themselves or together, can create a nice HDR photograph. But then you also have Topaz Adjust to kind of just kick it over the top.
Awesome, thank you. And David had asked, in HDR processing, do you use any noise reduction, or do you save that for later with Topaz denoise or something like that?
I always do that later. I don't do any noise reduction in the software that I'm using because I can't really trust the software to do it. It's kind of like why you shoot in RAW. You shoot in RAW because you don't want your camera to do all of its filtering adjustments on the photograph to spit out a JPEG. And the same can be said for any software that just does a blanket noise reduction effect. If you only have one slider to control your noise reduction, you don't have enough. And you saw in denoise that there's about 6 or 7, even more, plus some awesome presets that can really get you started in the right direction with your noise reduction. So I would actually use denoise over any other product that has it already built in to their tone mapping process.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, and then I had Shauna and Christine and quite a few other people ask if you could go over again what you did to kind of pull all the colors of the background image to create that warmish brown tone, and blending those color temperatures.
Oh, with the background duplication?
Also, something with the blur tool, or?
Yes, yep. Okay, so I'll go back to the source images on here and open up just that source image file and show you that again. If you take the background layer and you duplicate it, press Command or Control J, then go to Filter, and then go to Blur, and go to Average. It's going to take an average of all the colors that were in your background. So it's going to kind of just put them in a blender, blend them all up, and spit out just that brown color. So now that you have that brown color, you just move that layer right above your foreground layer, and then make a clipping mask by pressing Alt or Option right in between those two layers. That will tell Photoshop anything that that you want. It will only put that color into where you're telling it to go. So that color is only going to affect the foreground figure. And then we change that to something like soft light. That will help blend those color temperatures together. Light as well. You can go to overlay. It really is up to you. I think soft light looks the best by the way it blends those two together, and then you can drop the opacity if that's too much. So it's a really quick way to blend those two together. And if I turn that off, he looks like he doesn't belong there at all. But the minute I do that, I'm already in the right direction before I even did all the other stuff.
Thank you for covering that again. We had a lot of people that were really interested in that technique, so thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's see here. We're almost ending the hour. I'll end it with one of my favorite questions here. Sam says, I already have Topaz Adjust. If I was only able to buy 1 or 2 more products, what is your suggestion for those?
Well, it's a specific base. That question is good. I think if I were to only buy 2 more products, if all I had was Topaz Adjust, I would buy Remask and Denoise, because I think Adjust covers a lot of what you can do in clarity and detail, but those ones target certain areas specifically. Adjust will give you a lot of the effects that you can't get in something like Topaz, in like detail and clarity. But with Remask, Denoise, and Adjust, I think you can run the gamut on just about any photo, especially if you want to do compositing like this. Those 3 programs are going to be all you're really going to need. And the other ones are just nice to sprinkle in throughout there.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Blake. Really appreciate this whole tutorial and all the different techniques that you went over. It was definitely a little bit more in depth than we have here, and is always appreciated when we have somebody that comes in and really shows some things we haven't seen before. So awesome.
Very
Thank
cool.
you.
I'm glad it was enjoyed.
All right, everybody, have a great rest of the day, morning, or afternoon, wherever you are, and we'll be talking to you soon. Bye, everyone.